Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss Delta's Investor Day and the operational mess in the Northeast leading up to the July 4th holiday. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how you doing this week?
Hi, Ned. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. I know our listeners probably have been following the operational situation in the Northeast in the US. It's been pretty rough, especially for United Airlines. Weather has taken its toll, but so has air traffic control staffing. I want to say, listeners, we are going to visit this more in the podcast after the break. But first up, we're going to talk about Delta's Investor Day. Jay.
Yeah, so Delta had a big Investor Day event, which is where they gather the Wall Street analysts and some of their investors and kind of go give a deep dive look at their strategy. Not so much the current state of demand or not a whole lot of that sort of talk. We're going to get that in a couple of weeks when Delta reports their second quarter or the first quarter earnings. Second quarter earnings. Get this straight.
We're already there, Jay.
Yeah, I'm losing track of time here, but losing track of time. But the April, May, and June, they're going to be reporting for that quarter in just a couple of weeks here. And then we'll get a much better sense of how demand is faring. They did say that everything is still gangbusters. I think they're speaking more in general terms, but no real signs yet of any demand deterioration. Or I should qualify that by saying there are some kind of anecdotal evidence that the fall might perhaps not be as pristine as the summer has been, but more on that as earnings season rolls around.
I'm actually curious. What anecdotal points did you say about? We both listened to the call, so I'm curious what you heard about the fall, Jay.
Well, I'll give you a personal anecdote. So I just booked a ticket. I just booked a ticket with my family. 3 tickets for from Philadelphia to Denver, round trip. For $220, 3 tickets, and that was on Frontier Airlines. They have a kids fly free promotion. Now, is that just kind of some unusual exception? Who knows? But and I hear from other people that have gotten good deals. Just starting to see kind of lower prices in the fall. So, is that can we extrapolate that to draw any conclusions? No, but just something to keep in mind.
No, absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that because, so I listened to the call. I think one of the big takeaways that I took away is that corporate travel, Delta's not expecting corporate travel to come back anytime soon. They talked about it plateauing roughly the 80% level of 2019. And that's what we've heard from across industry. And they're really not expecting a step up in that for in the fall or maybe until next year. And because of that, they're really diversifying their business and looking at a lot of different things. And that kind of stood out to me when I was listening to the call and just what they were talking about.
Right. And I don't think they're definitively saying that corporate's going to remain flat. I think it's more of a, this is so new. We're in a, brave new world here. We don't know. Everything's very uncertain. So we don't want to assume that it's coming back. And so they're kind of moving forward with their strategy without building in that assumption. They're not planning on corporate to come back to it. So, but I think that's just a big question mark. I mean, I think they even just talked about the uncertainty with not just corporate, but travel trends in general, that we really don't know exactly how everything is going to pan out. Because, as we've come out of the pandemic, we've done so in this environment where the economy has been rather good in terms of spending power. Now everybody's waiting for that recession to come. I mean, they've been quarter after quarter, the recession's coming, and it never really comes. People continue to spend. Will that eventually peter out? By the way, I don't want to go off too much on an economic tangent here, but to me, it's not a huge surprise that Americans are still spending a lot. If you think about the fact that oil prices are down, gas prices, just down a lot. So you have that. The job market is still very healthy. And then you even, you have factors like, and it's kind of strange, but we think of the Federal Reserve raising interest rates as being a dampener on economic activity, which is probably the case. I mean, it certainly slowed the housing market, for example. But, people are earning a lot more interest income nowadays, too. So that could add to spending power. That one's, a little more of a controversial or disputed idea. But in general, you can see why, with the job market being so strong and inflation coming down, that people are still spending. Now, that said, there are many economists, very good economists, who argue that, eventually all these interest rate hikes and other forces are going to eventually, and including the depleted spending that has been built up, from various government programs during the pandemic. A lot of that stuff is starting to disappear from people's bank accounts, and eventually people stop spending. Don't know where it nets out, but that's what everybody's watching for the fall.
Yeah, everyone's watching it. But one thing Delta said, and we've heard the economic argument repeatedly, but I found it very interesting, was Delta's clear that their primary target customer outside of corporate are Americans that earn over $100,000 a year. And so that's sort of the upper middle class Americans, and they spend 70%. They make up 70% of Delta's business. And it was funny. It was interesting to listen to that, because that's the segment that I think most economic data said are doing the best in today's current economy. So it's and they continue to go. And anecdotally, I'm buying tickets too, just like you are, though I'm envious of that $200 fare you got to Denver. I'm spending $500 to take my family to Denver in August. So summer travel is definitely boom. But Delta really talked about how that segment continues to spend. And like you said, they've got excess savings that were built up during the pandemic. People that could refinance when rates were low have saved money there and everything. And it's that doesn't show much sign of slowing down. And so to the recession point, Ed Bastian, CEO of Delta, was asked, is Delta recession proof? And he said, no, we're not, but we're much more recession, flexible wasn't the word he said, but just much more able to weather an up and down in the economic cycle because of their diversified revenue streams, and I focus on diversifying revenues than they were before. And so it's interesting listening to that, and the recession talk is recession where art thou, because we still have yet to see any sign of that in the US. You summed up all of the different indicators, Jay, quite well.
Right. And Delta's really making a concerted effort to go after premium travel. And they're, outfitting their planes with more premium seats. They're adding more premium services. And that may sound counterintuitive, given the fact, as you alluded to earlier in this podcast, Ned, that corporate travel is still not where it used to be. And the corporate travelers were the ones who traditionally were purchasing these premium products. And it's not quite that way anymore. I mean, you have a lot of leisure passengers. Delta talked a lot about in their call the baby boomer generation, which I think is sitting on something like $75 trillion in wealth, and that's what they want to spend on travel. They're not spending on goods so much as they are experiences and retirement. And
you can only build so many decks on your house, Jay, but you can count as many trips as you want,
or buy so many cars and. And exactly. So people are purchasing, experiences more than they are goods right now, which is a wonderful thing for airlines if you're an airline. The way I kind of look at it too, this premium sounds counterintuitive, but if you think about it, if you go back in 20 years ago, U.S. airlines, there was a surplus of capacity. There's just a lot of empty seats in the sky, and so you kind of, in order to fill planes, you had to just kind of be everything to everybody. You had to be both Walmart and Target, and even a little bit, I don't know what the Nordstrom or something, Nordstrom or something like that. You kind of had to be everything to everybody in order to fill the planes. It's reached the point where there's more passengers than there are seats these days. There's such a shortage of seats that you can afford to focus on just being Target and just if you want, or maybe a little bit of Ferrari also, if you want to use the car analogy, BMW and Ferrari rather than selling, Honda Civics. And I think that's Delta's thinking. They're really not so interested in the in the very, very price sensitive travel anymore. And you can afford to do that given the supply demand dynamics and how that's changed over the course of the past few decades.
Speaking of that, talking of supply and demand, they gave a good chart where they outlined, U.S. capacity is going to be at 103% of 2019 this year. But had we continued on the growth path the airlines were on in 2019, we would have been at 120%. So there is a 17 percentage point deficit in capacity, and the economy is bigger today than it was in 2019. So that really stood out as an example of how the capacity limits in the restrictions in the market. Like you said, there's more travelers out there chasing flights than there are flights, and so airlines can get picky.
Yeah, it's a very favorable, and we've talked about in previous podcasts about how because of supply chain issues and other factors, airlines are not getting as many aircraft as they want and whatnot, and it's both frustrating but in the end satisfying because it's really pushing all this lack of supply is pushing up yields and prices. And I should add, by the way, we have a Skift has an intern that Jessica Wade, who just wrote an excellent article on this premium strategy that Delta's pursuing. I encourage you to check that out. But yeah, we'll see how it pans out. The other thing I just wanted to say before we move on from Delta is that they did update their 2023 operating margin guidance. So Delta now says, or previously they said that they were going to earn a 10% to 12% operating margin for all of this year. They're now saying it's a slight tweak. It's not a big one, but they're now saying that's going to come in towards the higher end. So closer to 12 than to 10. So good sign. I mean, that's that's positive there. They also say for 2024 that their operating margin will come in between 13% and 15%. Now for an airline, that's very good. I mean, that's, if you're double digits, you're happy with that. And they're also, predicting ample cash flow. And it's a rather happy picture. And just the final thing that I'll mention, just for comparison's sake, in 2019, Delta earned a 13.9% operating margin. So they expect next year to kind of get back to where they were in 2019. Although I believe Ed Bastian, Delta CEO, was adamant about stopping the comparisons to 2019. His message is that this is a whole new world and we're not looking back. But there you have it for your reference.
Yeah, but we always look back a little bit. But you're right. We need to look forward. Yes. With that, we'll take a quick break and we'll be back to talk about some of the operational issues U.S. airlines are facing. And we're back. So, Jay, this was not the week to be traveling in the Northeast, particularly in New York. We've had thousands of flights canceled across airlines. United Airlines, though, has stood out as having the most cancellations, which have continued. And they've accepted that is partially due to crews out of place and their own issues. But CEO Scott Kirby was very vehement that the FAA failed, and those are his words, failed them in terms of air traffic control flow into and out of Newark, which is a big United hub, over the weekend. So we've got that. It's not the best time to have a big operational snafu as we head into July 4th travel, which is one of the big summer holidays here in the US. It's not the busiest travel period of the year, but it is definitely a busy travel period of the year. And it's interesting. Things will hopefully, by the time you listen to this on Friday, and we're recording this Thursday morning, things will be better and smoother. But it's cancellation of United has still been in the double digits. It's not United, not Southwest at Christmas levels, which were 70, 80%, but it's still 20+%, and that's not insignificant, but it's something.
Yeah, Ned, you've been following the details closer than I have on this particular, these particular issues here with the operations. It does feel like this is a different situation from last summer in the sense that airlines really weren't prepared for it last summer. They were understaffed. Part of that, not to their own fault. It was just, tighter labor markets and whatnot. And the fact that demand just sort of sprung back and, recovered suddenly. And it was just, they had a difficult time reacting, airports as well, with staffing. It does sound like this is more weather / air traffic control related. Now, what I don't know, I mean, when I think of delays, I kind of think of, several different buckets of things that can go wrong. There's, of course, the weather, which is always rough in the summer because you have the thunderstorms, which, very difficult flying conditions. Then you have the air traffic control, which we know in the US seems to be still a mess this summer, understaffing and probably, outdated technology, I imagine. And then, you have the staffing issue, the airline staffing issue, and perhaps airports we can add in there as well. That does seem to be okay this summer. And then I guess the fourth bucket would be sort of the internal procedures and the software that the airlines themselves are using, what's happening inside these airlines. Now we know that Southwest had their big issue, as you mentioned, in Christmas time. I don't know that something like that is happening at United or any airline this summer. I honestly just don't know enough, but that's something to watch out for. I mean, certain things, there's not a whole lot you can do about that. Air traffic control, there's not a whole lot the airlines can do about that. So that's something to keep an eye on. Are the airlines handling it as best as they could? Are they handling it with the appropriate technology? Do they need to make further investments?
Absolutely. And you know what? Speaking to the comparisons with last summer, U.S. airlines had been performing actually quite well operationally up
Mm-hmm.
until this week,
Yeah.
this summer. So, the argument is there that they have staffed up appropriately and were, scheduling appropriately for good weather. Now, the catalyst here was we had a couple of days of severe weather in the Northeast, particularly New York. And that is where we all knew that the issues would be faced due to air traffic control staffing. That was something the FAA made public earlier this year. And that just seems to have, at least for United, just sort of set off a sort of domino effect of delays and cancellations across the airline. That said, they remain concentrated in Newark. They're a big hub there, and I think that has something to do with the hub and spoke network that an airline like United. Sorry, my dog is sneezing in the background here.
And
But
tell
that
tell
has something to do.
everybody what your dog's name is.
My dog's name is Heathrow. She's a very good girl and has no issues with the two runway system that Heathrow has. But that's another story. But so one of the things that Southwest faces their network is point to point. So if a flight canceled in Baltimore, it would affect flights that go on to Nashville and St. Louis and Denver and Oakland and across the country. United's a point to point airline, not a point, sorry, is a hub and spoke airline. And many of their planes, not all, fly back and forth between one hub and spokes all day. So if you look at the data, looking at Flight Radar 24 data, the cancellations are definitely concentrated in New York at Newark. And I think that's a fact that their hub and spoke system is what it is. There are cancellations across the network. It's clearly spread, but it's not nearly the 80% that we saw at Southwest over the holidays, just I think in part because of that. Now, you talked about technology. I haven't heard anything about United Systems failing. I've heard about them being some crew rescheduling, for example, being overwhelmed, but none of the technology failing that we heard about with Southwest. But yeah, it's interesting. We have Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg acknowledging that the FAA air traffic control staffing is let's see, not at the level I want to see, especially in New York. But he also says that the issues that United is facing are not the number one cause is not air traffic control. Of course, he would say that, and United CEO would definitely say that it's not us. We'll find out the truth will probably be somewhere in between the two of them. We'll find out that as things come out. But it's interesting, and I want to quote Brett Snyder, the cranky flyer here, is that United showed no matter how well you prepare, anyone can have their operation torn to pieces by bad weather. And the next time that hits, say if JFK had some of the similar operational constraints that Newark did, and the data suggests that FA's flight cap at JFK wasn't as strict as Newark, we could be talking about Delta or JetBlue being the one melting down. So it's interesting, but definitely uh, not a good way to enter the July 4th travel holiday. That's for sure.
No, no. And what's also interesting too is that, we talk all the time about how airline supply is, so limited, and demand is running ahead of supply, and airlines wish they had more planes and more seats. And you would think that would be helpful for managing airline operations. But I guess that everything is just all the flights are just so full that makes it difficult to reaccommodate people, and just kind of adds to the just add to the challenges and trying to deal with some of these weather issues, whether they're operation caused by, weather or otherwise.
Oh yeah, whatever the cause of operational distress, I mean, the capacity limits and full flights really do make it challenging to reaccommodate people. I remember last summer when I had my own misconnect due to air traffic control in Germany over Frankfurt. I mean, it took 3 days for myself and my family to get a flight home just because everything was full coming out of Europe. So, but that's the truth. We're lucky. We had travel insurance and we're able to stay in a hotel, and it was fine. But, for anyone who doesn't have that, and if United's attributing many of these cancellations to weather or air traffic control, they technically don't need to put up their passengers in a hotel. But that's a whole nother story, and that's something that I know will be talked at amongst passenger concerns and the DOT. But it's definitely can be a challenge to get another flight out when planes are so full.
Yep. Well, we got another 2 months or so of summer. I guess things will start tailing off at the end of August, demand wise. But hope it's not too challenging for anybody out there that's plans to fly.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, with that, I think we'll leave it there. Listeners, you can always reach us. I am at er@skift.com. Jay is at js@skift.com. Jay, always a pleasure.
Okay, Ned. Yep. Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.